Hello. Welcome to the preparatory session for the second U.S. State Department Roundtable on Cambodia. Before we start, I would like to first note something very important to Cambodian partners, specifically NDI, IRI, RFA, VOA, and other key partners that have been serving the Khmer people for decades. This is a moment that presents a vital opportunity where they can seek U.S. State Department support for reconsideration of recent decisions to defund key journalistic and intelligence sources. For this preparatory session, in advance of the second roundtable, we canvassed leading experts, including a former ambassador to Cambodia, to define the most urgent issues that the U.S. government must address. Their insights supported the over 650 Khmer international participants who all raised concerns and identified the priority issues at the first U.S. State Department Roundtable on March 26, 2025. From that process, 3 priority areas were identified, and that includes 1, escalating political repression and destruction of democracy; 2, the growing disproportionate influence specifically of China's economic and military participation and Vietnam's growing influence in Cambodia; and 3, the need for stronger U.S. economic pressure to influence the Hun Manet and Hun Sen regime. It is also important to note 2 additional critical issues that require attention. That is the U.S. government's decision to defund NDI, IRI, VOA, RFA that have long served as trusted sources of information intelligence for U.S. policymakers and partners operating in Cambodia and Southeast Asia. These platforms were already forced out, bought out, and expelled by the Hun Sen government. Pulling U.S. support now directly advances the regime's goal to eliminating the last channels of independent media, independent journalism, and ground-level recording. At a time when U.S. aid, diplomacy, trade are being measured for strategic return, cutting the support strengthens the authoritarian regime and deepens the growing influence, foreign influences in Cambodia and the region. 2 is a new development of the regime's latest expansion of repression that builds on longstanding patterns that includes political assassination and the forced return of exiled dissidents from countries like Thailand and Malaysia. To frame these critical issues and offer expert advice, Brad Adams, former Asia Director of Human Rights Watch, opens the session with insights gathered from a former U.S. ambassador to Cambodia and other high-level experts who echo and support the same concerns raised by the international Khmer community.
In anticipation of the U.S. State Department's second roundtable on Cambodia, we canvassed a number of experts dealing with Cambodian issues, including a former ambassador of the United States to Cambodia. The result of that canvassing was very similar to the International Khmer Community Survey that we conducted for the first U.S. State Department Roundtable on Cambodia on March 26, 2025. The 3 major issue areas that were identified as requiring priority attention were, first, the worsening political repression in Cambodia, especially the destruction of the political opposition, the use of mass criminal trials, and the forced closure of independent media. Second, the growing and disproportionate influence of China and Vietnam in Cambodia, both with respect to Chinese economic and military participation in Cambodia, and the growing influence of Vietnam. Third, the need to apply stronger economic pressure to influence the actions of the Hun Sen and Hun Manet regime. Recent examples have shown that they respond directly to economic pressure, and this strategy must be expanded. In addition, the Cambodia experts, as well as the international Khmer community, were adamant about the necessity of having the U.S. government reassess its decision to eliminate the funding and activities of VOA and RFA in Cambodia and in other Southeast Asian nations. Those sources of independent journalism operate not only to assist the Khmer community, but they provide the most substantial form of factual information and intelligence to the U.S. government itself. Without these sources, U.S. foreign policy is being carried out without the strongest possible factual basis. I'll also add that so many Cambodians have taken risks to work for VOA and RFA, and now they are being repaid by being put at risk or having their families put at risk in Cambodia from the Hun Sen and Hun Manet regime. This is an opportunity for key partners like NDI, IRI, RFA, and VOA to seek U.S. government support to revisit these defunding decisions and restore critical sources of information and intelligence that have long supported democratic efforts in Cambodia. In particular, the Republican majority in the House and Senate, who have long supported RFA and VOA, should be contacted, supported, and lobbied to revisit this terrible decision by the Trump administration.
Now we will hear from a community advocate and one of the researchers named Chan Tut. He will be presenting the first issue, the political repression and destruction of democracy.
The situation of widespread political repression in Cambodia has gone significantly downhill in the 45 years of the Hun Sen and Hun Manet dictatorial regimes. A low point was reached ahead of the 2023 national elections when the UN extensively documented and criticized. 1. The opposition political party were declared illegal and forced to disband. 2. Mass criminal trials, at least 7 since 2020, were conducted to imprison, silence, and force into exile over 150 opposition political leaders and other critics of the government. 3. Independent media outlets, including foreign press agencies, were forced to close or give control over their operations to the government, and independent journalists were jailed and silenced. Democracy and human rights were destroyed in the process, culminating in what the UN described as the hereditary appointment of Hun Sen's son, Hun Manet, as his successor as prime minister. The latest highly repressive action along this same line were the criminal prosecution and conviction of longtime union leaders and spokesperson for workers' rights, Rong Chun. He was sentenced to 4 years imprisonment for doing nothing more than exercising his free speech and free association right in support of workers' interests. It is long past due for the US government to speak clearly and forcefully and to take meaningful action to secure political reform in Cambodia that restore democracy and human rights as promised in the 1991 Paris Peace Accords. The slighted dictatorship and autocracy has gone long enough. The US must speak out and demand supportive action to promote democracy and human rights for Cambodia.
The main takeaway is that Cambodia's political repression has worsened over the past 45 years, reaching its lowest point during the 2023 national election. That election dismantled the political opposition, carried out mass criminal trials that silenced over 150 critics, and forcefully shut down independent media. These developments have been recognized and documented by the United Nations as the lowest point in Cambodia's democracy, accumulating in what the UN described as hereditary appointment of Hun Sen's son, Hun Manet, as his successor as prime minister. Another important thing to note is that the highly repressive action along the same lines was the prosecution and conviction of longtime union leader and spokesperson for workers' rights is Rong Chun, who was sentenced to 4 years in prison simply for exercising free speech and association in support of workers. Now we will hear from another community advocate and another researcher named Sovannarit Khawam. He will be presenting a major issue that is widely held view by the Khmer community worldwide, and for decades that deserve the highest priority attention. This is regarding the sovereignty and territory integrity, particularly the growing foreign influences by the government, specifically by China and Vietnam.
There was a consensus among the Khmer community and Cambodian experts that the issue increasing incursions into Cambodian sovereignty and territorial integrity by China and Vietnam was the issue that deserved highest priority attentions. Over the past decade, China and Vietnam has rapidly expanded their military and economic footprints in Cambodia. China now operates a naval base in Ream with a second military-capable facility reportedly under development at Dasa, Darasako in Gokong Province. These installations are part of a broader Chinese strategies of dual-use infrastructure projects that appear to serve both commercial and potential military purposes in at least 2 additional provinces. International observers have linked Chinese control operation to cybercrime, human trafficking, and online scam networks, raising concerns about foreign control and sovereignty issues in at least 5 additional provinces. Similarly, Vietnamese military-linked companies have acquired tens of thousands of hectares in northeastern Cambodia. In Ratanakiri alone, Corp 15, a unit of Vietnamese military, holds nearly 40,000 hectares. Along the eastern border, over 100 Vietnamese military outposts have been reported across 8 provinces, with some converted into permanent structures. At the same time, Vietnam is deepening its influence into Cambodia's infrastructure and economy as seen in calming the Ho Chi Minh City and Phnom Penh Expressway. These foreign installation trends are a major concern for Cambodian sovereignty and territorial integrity and directly violate the 1991 Paris Peace Accords, which was established to protect Cambodia from foreign military influence. The U.S. must put pressures on the Hun Manet and Hun Sen government to stop these incursions and to maintain integrity of Cambodian sovereignty and territorial interests.
The growing disproportionate foreign influence of China and Vietnam in Cambodia has been a common agreement that the Khmer community and Cambodia experts have, specifically with China's economic and military participation and Chinese linked operations to major crimes and trafficking networks in at least 5 additional provinces. Then there is the Vietnamese military linked land acquisition and outposts across many provinces with a new major infrastructure project that raises concerns of deepening the influence. Now we will hear from another community advocate and researcher, Sutia Boy. He will be addressing the need for stronger U.S. economic pressure to influence the Hun Manite and Hun Sen regime.
Hello, my name is Sotia Poj. I'm the current chair of the Committee for Paris Peace Accord on Cambodia and Minnesota. I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today. Currently, there is a growing and overwhelming sentiment from the Khmer community worldwide that the U.S. government must do far more on the economic fronts to influence meaningful change in Cambodia. Recent example has shown that targeted economics pressure works. The Cambodian government withdrew from the CLV economic agreement in response to massive international protests. The 19-branch initiative forced a pullback on retaliatory action against workers. The U.S. government's decisions to link foreign aid to the release of political prisoners also produced results. All these economic initiatives has produced positive results, and the Hun Manet and Hun Sen families respond well to economic pressure. That is what moved them and must be expanded. The U.S. is one of Cambodia's largest trading partners, particularly in the textile sector. That leverage must not be wasted. Cambodia's economy is heavily dependent on Chinese investments, which has allowed China to entrench both economics and military influence by controlling factory infrastructure and ports. Vietnam has expanded its economics and territorial footprints in key border regions. While the benefit of the U.S. trade are directly going into the pocket of the Hun Sen family and ally, the U.S. government must do more to apply effective economic pressure to influence the actions of the Hun Manet and Hun Sen's regime. That means placing firm conditions on all forms of economic support, including trade benefits, development, aid assistance until clear as meaningful reform are made. No more blank checks. The Cambodian government must show measurable progress on democracy, human rights, and the rule of law where international benchmark has already been laid out by the UN and endorsed by the US. Thank you.
There is a clear agreement that the Khmer international community that the U.S. must do more to apply economic pressure. The U.S. government holds great economic leverage and must use it, especially with trade preferences and development assistance. Most importantly, there have been 3 recent examples that show targeted economic pressure works. The first example that Sutia mentioned was the 19 Brands Initiative, in which major companies demanded the Cambodian government to stop their retaliatory actions against labor and human rights groups. The second example he gave was the withdrawal of the CLV agreement, which followed grassroots and international pressure. This was a very rare instance where the regime publicly reversed course, acknowledging the legitimacy of community objections. And the third example was in October 2024, where there was a linkage between U.S. foreign aid to progress in human rights and the release of political prisoners. Lastly, this brings us to an additional and dramatic new development and a growing concern among the international Khmer community and Cambodia experts. This is an expanded repression of dissidents beyond borders. Finally, Brad Adams will end this session with the additional issue, the regime's escalating repression and expanding pattern.
There is a dramatic and deeply concerning expansion in the way that Hun Manet and Hun Sen are targeting dissidents. This escalation is part of a long-standing pattern of repression, including the assassinations of people who I used to consider my friends, people like Tun Bun Lee, the journalist who was killed in 1995, Rhapsody, the former member of parliament, who was gunned down in Phnom Penh, Chia Vichia, the labor activist, Chut Wadi, the environmental activist, Kem Lay, the very popular political commentator, and the forced return of exiled dissidents and refugees from countries like Thailand and Malaysia. What is new and alarming is the regime's growing boldness, the coordination of its actions, and the extension of its authoritarian control beyond Cambodia's borders. Repression is no longer confined within Cambodia. It is now crossing borders to silence opposition voices wherever they exist. The most recent example is in January 2025, when Lim Kimya, a former CNRP parliamentarian and outspoken critic of the regime, was assassinated in Bangkok, in Thailand. Credible sources describe the killing as raising, quote, grave concerns of foreign government involvement in a politically motivated murder on Thai soil. Meanwhile, Rong Chun, also a friend of mine, a prominent labor leader, continues to face harassment and prosecution in Cambodia. These are not isolated cases. They reflect an organized campaign that builds on past repression but extends through new, more aggressive methods, targeting critics both at home and abroad. This mirrors, I should say, the tactics that the Chinese regime, the Chinese Communist Party, is embracing globally. This expansion has serious global implications. It violates international legal norms and threatens the safety of diaspora communities, civil society actors, and dissidents around the world. The Hun Manet and Hun Sen regime is making clear that it recognizes no boundaries, turning Cambodia's repression into a regional and international issue. Foreign governments like Thailand and Malaysia must stop being complicit in politically motivated acts of intimidation and forced repatriation. And the US government, which has long stood as the loudest voice for human rights and democracy in Cambodia, must find its voice again. Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, was a very loud champion of democracy and human rights when he was a member of the Senate. He has now gone quiet. The US government must call out the regime and demand an immediate halt to these brazen attacks on dissidents abroad.
The main takeaway in Brad's message is that these escalation build on a long-standing pattern that includes past assassinations and now the forced return of exiled dissidents from countries like Thailand and Malaysia. It shows that the regime's growing boldness, coordination efforts, and to silence opposition and critics wherever they exist. The January 2025 assassination of Lim Kim Ya in Bangkok and the continued harassment of labor leader Rong Chun are not isolated events. They reflect an expanding campaign that builds on past assassination, but extending through new and more aggressive methods to silence critics. He and the community, Brad and the community highlights that foreign governments, specifically Thailand and Malaysia, must stop being complicit in the politically motivated acts of intimidation and forced repatriation. And the US government must call out the regime and demand immediate talk to these brazen attacks on dissidents abroad. This has concluded the preparatory session for the second roundtable. The Khmer international community will continue to work with the US State Department to keep the State Department informed, especially with new developments and about major issues, and identifying more concrete and remedial action that can be taken. Thank you.